So just to give a very quick introduction to Anne. So Anne is the Chief Executive Officer of SEED. She has been working in environmental education for the last 30 years. She started out doing a stint as a countryside ranger in Scotland, and then she began traveling the world teaching, facilitating and coaching in places such as Papua New Guinea, Australia and Canada. She was Head of Education and Social Change at WWF UK and the Commissioner for Education and Capability Building for the Sustainable Development Commission. In 2008, she took on the role of revamping CEE, which is now SEED, and she's enjoyed seeing it return to a position of national prominence. And Anne's going to be talking about what Build Back Better actually means in the context of the education system. So over to you.
Thank you very much, Victoria. It's great that you said all that, because there's quite a few things I can actually now cut out of my talk, and it's great that Aled mentioned so many things as well, because there's quite a few things I could also cut out. But it's the same as everyone's been talking about, you know, what is the future going to be looking like as a result of COVID, but obviously people who've been thinking about climate change are thinking about that as well. And I just got invited today to a group of thought leaders to speak to the next Nick Stern. So there is a professor from LSE who for the Treasury is now doing a report on the economics of biodiversity and nature, so that we are thinking about that as well as climate change, as well as pandemics, which actually does fill me with some hope. But there are some things that don't fill me with hope, and I hope this isn't going to be too depressing. One of the things that keeps coming up is what does an education fit for the future look like? You know, what will its purpose be, and what is it that we should be valuing and therefore including in an education system? And this is a question that's been on my mind for many years, and obviously it's been on the mind of many people for a long time as well, because CEE, which was the precursor of SEED, started in the 1960s. So for 60 years, people have been worrying about what we're teaching young people and what the role of education is. I recently came across this quote, which I love. So here it is. When I look back in every period of history, two flames have been burning in the human heart. The flame of anger against injustice and the flame of hope that you can build a better world. To understand that is very important, because if you don't have that aspiration, then you will find yourself in a position of thinking how the human race is going to cope with its problems. That wasn't written this year. It was written in 2006 by Tony Benn. And it's made me think about how we currently construct our education system. And it's fundamentally based upon a notion that we, the decision makers, some of whom are in the room and others who are not, know how to prepare young people for a future world that we've identified. And that future is one that we know, and it's sometimes based on what we know from the past, and it's one that we understand now. And I would question that. And that approach is and thinking about that world is a world that works well for some people, and one could argue it's a means by which currently the entitled, or those in power, however you want to define that power, continue to be entitled. The gifted and talented are identified in our school system so that they help out with our future needs. And the rest are socially and culturally trained to be good citizens, accepting the status quo. And I'd like to quote Ivan Illich from the 1960s, who said, he wrote a book called Deschooling Society, which everyone thought was really radical. But he basically said that education systems are the best advertisement for maintaining the status quo. That's what he said they were for. So it could be argued that this perception of what our education system is for is reinforced by the acceptance of the fact that we've got private schools, the primacy of Oxford and Cambridge, and a government cabinet that reflects people with those backgrounds. I also say this because Michael Gove, when he was Secretary of Education for the UK, reviewed the national curriculum, but he ignored all the advice from his own review panel of experts and instead followed the advice of a US academic called Ed Hirsch. And Ed Hirsch's basic premise is that the state education systems around the world primarily should be about inculcating young people into your culture. Which begs the question, whose culture are we talking about? And is the past culture going to be the same as the future culture? And we've got an increasingly diverse Britain. We've got a globalized, connected world. So it's very hard to define that culture. Thinking about the British values part of the UK curriculum, they look like a list of democratic principles, but these are not uniquely British, so that you can't say they're British culture. Furthermore, all of this culture implicitly focuses upon us as separate from nature and that natural world that we depend upon. It's often, by omission, endorses an imperialistic approach to the environment. Imperialist by meaning we will take what we want from it, and to the other. And by that, an example might be cheaper labor in communities in distant parts of the world that own the resources that we want. And we continue to do that sort of thing. This approach and attitude to education has also led to an industry saying that they have the answer. So people keep popping up. They've got creativity as the answer. They've got enterprise as the answer, or STEM or science is the answer. And these are solutions that are often pounced upon by politicians because it fits their short-term political purposes and potentially their view of education. Our current UK Prime Minister is saying to people that Build Back Better focus for the national government will be three things: infrastructure, technology, and the digital world, and thirdly, education. So why those three? Well, building big infrastructure projects increases your GDP. And it allows countries such as us to get a better credit rating if we increase our GDP. We can get more borrowing, and that sustains our massive financial industry that's based in London, and it's massive in a global position. Technology, because we are no longer a manufacturing country, so we need something else. So that's the hope. And education, because it feeds the other two. That's a bit of a technocratic imperialist view of education. I'd love to think that it's about greening education or greening these industries, but my inside information says those words are not being used by the current national government. It's great to hear that they are at a county level. Our existential crises that we're currently in are not just limited to climate change and the pandemic, but they also include the destruction of massive biodiversity loss and ecosystems and their services that we need, including disruption of cycles. It's a looming ecological catastrophe. We live in a world, as Alid said, of inequality and conflict, and where slavery, poverty, and gross injustice continues to be found. And as educators, we've built educations that are supposed to address these issues. Yet by continuing to focus on these as single issues, we are in danger of building silos and a professional territory that argues that each person's individual topic or focus in education is the one that will save the world or make it a better place. This has even happened in environmental and sustainability conversations. We've had energy education, outdoor education, climate education, waste education, again, missing the wider point of addressing the flame against injustice and the flame of hope to build a better world. Decades after our first attempts to bring a more holistic approach to these matters, we are still little further forward. It must be time to rise above this, and maybe thinking about the purpose of education in the light of these crises may be the way to go. Having said that, please do carry on the learning associated with your topic, your passion, your expertise, but maybe ask yourself, what part of the whole is it fulfilling? And what new thinking is it engendering? There's a myth that's out there that drives me up the wall. It's the myth of awareness raising. And I've heard it from everyone, from teenagers, young people, all the way through to older adults. And this myth of awareness raising is that if you give people the right facts, then they will make the right rational decisions. Turns out we're not rational. And as a theory of change, that doesn't work. So we are going to have to create a different set of ways of thinking about things. We're going to have to encourage thinking about change itself, environmental change, social change, economic change, personal change, and even political change. We also need to understand the systems that we operate and have created and we live within and how they connect. We cannot talk, as Alad has already said, about the coronavirus without discussing globalization, food production and security, economics, poverty, wildlife, and other human systems such as trade, health, politics, and education. All of those have been exposed through this pandemic. And if we don't discuss all of those things, at best, we are shortchanging our young people, and at worst, it's censorship. We need to think more in systems. We cannot address these crises without asking the question, how did we get here? So we need to encourage socially critical thinking. This would include not educating about values or trying to get the right values into our young people, but providing students with the opportunity to explore values and allowing them to reflect and make up their own minds. Anything else is indoctrination. And I am part of a business sector, if you like, that are very keen to get the right values into young people. And I could scream every time I hear those words. This brings me to a fundamental approach to education that has been prevalent for centuries. It's the idea that students are empty vessels, that they have to be filled. And that you find that mostly on the conservative spectrum of political thought. The truth is that young people do have a well-developed suite of values. The recent SEED Youth Survey revealed that they get their information, knowledge, and attitudes from a wide range of sources, including social media, TV, the internet, family, community, as well as school. And as educators, surely one of our critical tasks is to build and enable critical thinking about those sources with young people. In doing all this, we need to ask how to build the hope and not depress its flame with young people. We need futures thinking and to build a sense of agency so that young people feel they can be part of that future. And in schools, there are two ways to do this effectively. Inquiry-based project learning or project-based learning, depends what you call it. Some people call it action learning is one. And then secondly, connecting young people's learning to the real world through in-community projects. And I don't just mean raising money for charity. These methodologies allow students to learn how to learn, be creative, work in teams, work collaboratively, work in the real world. All skills that many businesses say they want. And they will build the resilience that will build those, if you like, that green economy and those green skills. Sadly, teachers are struggling to do this, given that the state education in the UK has become so politicised. Many in the profession are fearful of being judged poorly by the measures that have followed from this politicisation. There is one reason why many primary teachers educate about air pollution rather than climate change. And that reason was Mr. Gove. So thank you, Mr. Gove. Teachers will always say they have no time, given the pressures to deliver the national curriculum, the lack of resources and little training. And they are not wrong. So those wonderful people that are adopting these more radical approaches are doing an amazing job keeping flames alight, but they are not mainstream. They're not every teacher, they're not every school, and not every child has a right to this. And so we and they need a mandate to make the purpose of education clear. And the methodologies that follow should fit that purpose. And that brings me to the Education Act that SEED has been campaigning for. And that is not the national curriculum, because the national curriculum is not statutory, but the Education Act is. And that campaign is to say the purpose of education is to care for oneself, care for others, and care for the environment or the planet. We also need to disabuse teachers and schools that it's difficult to teach for a sustainable future and to build resilience. It's not expensive, nor is it a new subject. It's a way of teaching and designing learning opportunities. So training in that is required. I don't think people need to be trained in sustainability. It needs inspectors trained in those ways of teaching as well. And it needs full partnerships with parents and communities, not an army of consultants. It needs schools to be supported in this learning journey through such mechanisms as whole school approaches or many of the other innovative ways of doing this. Crucially, we as an environmental and sustainability education sector need to review our role in this new approach. Can we let go of our own specific agendas and find a better way to support this holistic rebooting or building back better? And it's not about critiquing teachers, young people, schools, or politicians. Now is the time when we should all be reflecting upon what we are doing, why we do it, and how we can change. This has been Seed's mission, and we will continue to pursue it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Anne. I know you have to dash off now, but that was brilliant, and hopefully there'll be lots of questions that will come your way. And if you're happy to answer those, that would be fantastic.
I could actually stay for about 5 minutes.
Okay, great. So if we've got any questions from anyone in the audience. We're all a bit stunned.
I could go.
No, nothing yet. Oh, here we go.
So from Pauline, how would Seed influence the government to change its current policies and focus on the environment? I don't think Seed is going to be able to do it on its own. I don't think any of us are going to be able to do it on our own. The people who are having the most impact currently, and have a massive coalition behind them, are the young people's movement Teach the Future. That the youth climate campaigns and Teach the Future are having quite an impact, although they are still waiting to have a meeting with the Secretary of State for Education, and he has not replied at all to them. And they wrote months and months ago. So I don't think they are interested, to be honest, but I think there is a movement happening, and I think eventually that movement will be so powerful that politicians who want to get re-elected, I'm sorry I'm being cynical, but that's what they want, will have to listen, and they will listen. But it won't just be Seed, it'll be a whole range of people as well. So we continue to keep this conversation alive and to keep the ideas out there. And I'm delighted to be part of a round table discussing for Her Majesty's Treasury what the role of environmental education would be in this report that's being written currently. So there's a whole chapter on education. So that's the most positive thing I think I've seen for a very long time. And it takes us way beyond, I hope it's the questions that they're asking takes us way beyond forest schools or just encouraging young people to have experiences in nature. It takes us to the whole systems and how we think about ourselves as part of nature rather than separate. So that sounds really promising. Yep. Yes, it is a mindset. I don't think it's about training people. I wasn't trained in it, and many people aren't. It's actually something that's about how we think, how we live, and how we then make decisions. And learning that alongside the students, I think, would be incredibly powerful. And that was from Pauline. What should schools' first steps be on this path? What I do often, and I've done this in Cambridge with the Stephen Peirce Foundation, I encourage them to think about this, because people get overwhelmed by the idea of becoming a sustainable school, which sounds enormous and difficult and vast. And what I honestly say is, do you know what, you're probably doing it already. And I did do this with the RHS, the Royal Horticultural Society. They said, we don't have a sustainability strategy. And I said, but you'll be doing it. And they said, no, we're not doing it. We don't have a strategy. I said, no, you'll be doing it. People will be doing it off their own bat. And let me interview 20, 25 people, and I will find examples of what you're already doing. And that's called appreciative inquiry. And you will find that there are people in schools already doing stuff. It'll be below the radar. There won't be a big song and dance about it, and it'll be beyond, World Environment Day, or maybe an eco little group or committee. But there will be stuff going on, and you start to build from that. And the biggest thing I've seen change is actually doing the whole school approach, but then thinking about what's your mission as a school. What is it you're really trying to help young people become? Everyone says prepare them for the future, but we have to prepare them for, be honest and say that's a future we don't know. So we have to build resilience. We have to build a whole range of things. And the biggest thing I think is a sense of agency.